Hello, I am mischievous Mr. Met, Mark Giannacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which I say do not count.
And I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say definitely count. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy. If you guys aren't watching on video right now, Mark is wearing his New York Mets hat, and he is all excited. By the time you're listening or watching this, you will know the fate of the Mets that Mark and I have yet to experience. But for right now, we're optimistic, and Mark is kind of like on cloud nine about his team. So an invitation into the behind the scenes of this and Mark's eagerness about the Mets.
That's right, Dan. And all I can say is, as someone who used to be on the West Coast, I don't want to hear any like Randy Newman, I love LA from you or anything like that right now. It's Mets Dodgers and the Mets, the Grimace Mets, the Latin pop star Mets, the Hawk Tua girl Mets. We're going all the way this year, Dan, or maybe we won't, but whatever. I'm past the point of the usual torture and kicking the lower extremities that I get from my baseball team, and now we're just having fun. So
awesome of you to shout out our sister show, Talk Tua, that podcast. Welcome to the realm of podcasting, Hawk Tua girl.
There we go.
Yeah. Anyway, a shout out on Amazing Spider Talk. We'll send your numbers through the roof.
There we go. There we go. But in the meantime, we're here to talk The Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yes, if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. These reviews are important as they are the best way for us to spread the word about our show and indicate the size of our audience to guests and collaborators. We're at 399 reviews. Can someone jump in and give us the 400th review? That would be awesome.
It's the Aunt May death issue of review numbers, right, Dan? Anyway, this podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, go to Amazing Spider Talk and consider joining our Patreon.
Yeah, today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 59, the penultimate issue of the Zeb Wells run. And on that note, this issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover features artwork by John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and a welcomed back Marcio Menyz, who I think his work on the covers always makes them better. The interior pages feature pencils by John Romita Jr., inks by Scott Hanna, and colors by Marcio Menyz, as well as letters by our favorite VC's Joe Caramagna. This issue is first released on October 9th, 2024. So, getting into this story, I think there's no better place to kind of start than to respond to the advertising of this issue, which is say this was, claimed to be the most brutal fight in Amazing Spider-Man history, and that's a fairly tall, claim to make. I have my feelings about it, Mark, but I'm curious what you think. Do you think, is this the most brutal fight in Amazing Spider-Man history, however you measure that? And if not, do you think it even falls close within the realm of that title?
I think it's in the top 5. I don't know. I mean, I think about, Moreland. I think about, even, Amazing 700, which wasn't, as graphically brutal, but, Spider-Man dies at the end of that one. I mean, it's pretty brutal. Not technically amazing Spider-Man issues, but I think of, the Doc Ock Spidey fight at the end of the Owl Octopus Wars arc where Spidey's ripping off the tentacles. I mean, that was very brutal and cutthroat. There's some fights with the Kingpin. Obviously, Back in Black is quite, Spider-Man isn't necessarily on the receiving end, but that's an uncomfortable comic to look at from if you're not into pacifism, I guess you would say.
Sure.
maybe it's in the top 5 or top 10. I don't know if it's the most brutal, but like, this is at the same time, I don't want to like make it sound like, oh, Nick Lowe overselling comics again. Like this was a brutal issue of Spider-Man. I mean, what's your take on it?
I mean, I think it 100% delivered on that promise. Again, I don't think it, if it is the top one, I mean, I don't want to split hairs. I think this is amongst the most brutal fights in Amazing Spider-Man history, and I think is unique in the kind of fight that it is. I think even amongst the most brutal ones in the history of the book, they usually like are Spider-Man against an outmatched foe, and it's him just kind of being thrown around like, a rag doll. And that's very much not the fight here. This is a mano fight of two very well matched fighters. And it's a whole issue focused on it as well. This isn't just a couple pages, and there's a great deal of history and drama behind this fight. And so I think it kind of has like a lot of the stuff that you'd look individually to other fights for, but kind of all packed into one. And I'll say this, like, I don't know that I pick up Spider-Man comics specifically for the like superhero fights. I mean, yes, there is an appeal to that. Like if I just wanted soapy drama, I would, probably read other books. I like the action. I like the way that it's like visually portrayed on the page. And I particularly over the years have kind of like talked about how much I love the mechanics of these fights, like what makes Spider-Man unique. And I don't really know that is 100% present here. Like there's not webs, there's not wall crawling, there's not a ton of spider sense. It's really just kind of like a bare knuckles fight. It is the Matrix final fight scene with Agent Smith in a Spider-Man comic without even the kind of like, insane superheroics or like mind-bending physicality of that fight. Like this is two dudes. Like this might as well be like a homeless person fight. Like
right.
in the subway.
Right.
Except that these people can withstand more brutal beatings than any human being we know.
Right.
But it still feels like an essential Spider-Man fight that I would rank up there amongst the best ever put in a book. And I think a lot of that has to do with not only the pacing of it from Wells, but also JRJR's contributions. So, like, what other fights would you put up alongside this so we can kind of compare it to them?
Well, before I do that, I do want to like pick on something that not pick on like make like criticize, but like pick off of something, keep talking on something you said way back at the beginning of your monologue, and I'm not criticizing that you just monologued there, Dan, but like
I'm known to do it, Mark.
It's all good, but you had mentioned like we had seen in fights before, kind of like Spider-Man against the odds, and kind of like that, like that immovable force, unstoppable object thing, and I think what was incredibly unique about this is that Tombstone was kind of the Spider-Man role here. Like a lot of this, they're evenly matched, but like there are a lot of sections where it's just like, okay, that's got to put Tombstone out, and then he's just kind of, like just his sheer relentlessness, and like it was very different than what we've seen in past battles, like with the Juggernaut or Moreland, where, like you said, it was just someone who's so super powered, and like they basically were taking Spider-Man's best shot and were unfazed by it. Tombstone is quite fazed by this fight, but he is just so empowered by his desire to win that he just keeps coming, and I don't think we've ever seen that in a Spider-Man fight. I can't point to a single Spider-Man fight. Like you said, it's always more of that, like Spider-Man overcoming the odds after getting his teeth kicked in for 20 pages or whatever. And I mean, Spider-Man certainly takes his beating here, but like the fact that Tombstone takes his as well, like we're not. I don't know if we're going to get to a point in this storyline where it's going to, we're going to have mutual respect per se, but like as a reader, I'm like, damn, like Tombstone, like he took a lot, and because he's not really super powered. I mean, he's super powered in the way that Kingpin is, like it's just that he's a really strong dude, but like I don't feel like I mean, Tombstone's. You're looking at me like you're wrong.
He does. I mean, it depends on who's writing him, but he did in the past get his skin upgraded to the point that he can like take bullets, a la like Power Man, which is why it was surprising in the Wedding issue that those bullets punctured his skin. So he is, whatever meta human or whatever you want to call it. Like,
I guess.
Yeah.
I it's hard for me to think of him in that realm. I mean, like I still think of him as just someone who kind of the way I think of Captain America. I know like he's got the super serum and all that, but like I don't know, like he's enhanced, but he's not. I don't know, like it's a little different.
He's a quote unquote super soldier, if you will. Yeah. Like he's stronger than an average dude, but he should in no world be able to take on Spider-Man. And he loses. Let's be frank. Like the only reason he like quote unquote wins the fight is because Spider-Man sacrifices himself for Tombstone.
Right. For sure. Okay, but I just did want to get that out of the way because I felt that's what added a real unique layer and what kind of sets it apart from other fights in terms of the brutality, because I don't think we have seen, other villains kind of step back up again. But like how would I compare
I do want to respond to your response, which is I think the comparison to Spider-Man is 100% intentional. Within this story. I don't know what's going to happen in issue 60, but the conclusion of this story seems to me to be headed towards these two men like addressing how they respond to trauma and responsibility and power between the two of them, as we've seen echoed before in previous stories. Like they are meant to be reflections of each other, and that's nothing new for a Spider-Man villain, but I think Wells is definitely leaning into that here, and I think it was appropriate for you to bring that up.
Yeah, for sure. But like comparing it to other fights, I mean, like I don't know, like I said, the first Moreland fight, I mean, like I always come back to that because that just felt like, sheer desperation. I mean, pick a Venom fight from the 90s. Like 300 or maybe like 316 to 318 or something, or you know what I mean, like have your pick there.
It does feel like 317, where that was like very like it starts as a chase and becomes a fight that then comes down to some moralistic or smart stance at the end of the issue. That's actually a really like great comparison. The fight in 300 is just too short, I think, to really compare entirely to this. Yeah.
I mean, another good comparison I would think would be like the AVX fight against the Phoenix Colossus.
Sure.
I mean, certainly in terms of, but again, like I'm throwing something out there where it's just like, where you just feel like Spider-Man is gonna die from going up against someone who's just too much of an opponent for him. You know what I mean? Like I don't like you said, like Spider-Man only gets put in a position of failure here because he, is Spider-Man to his core and is not going to let Tombstone get run over by a subway train. Like I never, when the two are just punching and kicking each other, I'm never like, oh crap, how's he going to get out of this? You know what I mean? Like it feels, it doesn't feel quite as dire as that, but
it's like he's putting down a rabid dog, like more than anything. It reminds me somewhat of like at least in terms of like a fight with true like emotional stakes, like the Goblin fight from 122. I mean, like when I think of brutal fights, I think about like Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut or Moreland, the fight from Coming Home, but those are like characters that Spider-Man doesn't have any kind of emotional history or baggage with, and they're both great. And the emotional like stakes in the Moreland fight comes from like him calling Aunt May and like just the pure, unstoppability of it. But like the Goblin fight and this both feel like personal fights, and I think that elevates them even beyond the kind of punching and kicking of it all.
I mean, maybe you could throw the Hobgoblin fight from 250. Is it 251? The last.
Yeah, 251 with the battle van fight.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, although again, like, is it quite as emotionally potent? No. But I mean, it's a little. It feels like they're a little more evenly matched in that fight. You know what I mean? And that, like you said, there's more going on in the background. But yeah,
I think it's worth noting that of the ones I listed, like John Romita Jr. drew Juggernaut, Moreland, and this.
Very, very good. Yeah.
The guy is like 3 for 3 on big fights. So yeah. I did want to kind of bring up my complaint about the previous issue, where I thought that Tombstone was acting quite dumb, and that I didn't buy into his motivations.
Sure.
Because like that still plays in here. I need to believe that Tombstone is going to withstand this barrage from Spider-Man because he's so fixated on killing his daughter,
Right.
and they make it text, even more here. It's like,
Right.
like, don't do this, there's no coming back from this, I won't let you kill your daughter. And it does still impact the way I feel about this fight. I wish I really felt like I understood Tombstone's motivations and that I personally felt that it was earned to get him to this point. And I know you buy it, so I can just speak for myself. But I will say this issue did do some work to get me to buy into this more by the issue's end, where like the reveal ultimately, just like it was in the Goblin fight, that Spider-Man is like, I'm here to save you, in the same way that he said to Norman and has been an ongoing theme of this run. That like, if Spider-Man didn't believe that this was truly who Tombstone was, like someone who was going to kill his daughter, he wouldn't have fought him here. He would have just left. And like the fact that Spider-Man feels like this is out of character for Lonnie and that there is still something worth redeeming there was at least lip service to the fact that like this isn't who Lonnie is. And I'm like, okay, well, like I thought that too. Like I don't believe that the character, this is what will define him, and neither does Spider-Man. I still don't know that I think they put in the work to get him to this point. Like that, I believe that he would legitimately kill his own daughter. Like a thought beyond thinking. But seeing him kind of snap out of it at the end of the issue, like when faced with those words from Spider-Man, did like, at least let me buy that he wasn't in his right mind. And given that ultimate choice, he did kind of back down, and we're going to see who he really is, hopefully in the next issue. So like I'm slightly disarmed by it, even if my critique I think still holds.
I get, and look, and I'm not going to argue the original critique because we talked about that last episode, but like, again, like I think for me it just comes down to a willingness to accept that bad guys in comics, and I know we are of a generation where there are more shades of gray in our fiction than there used to be, but like I'm still, I still kind of look at it as Tombstone's a bad guy. Bad guys will do bad things, even if it sometimes feels a little out of the realm, I guess. You know what I mean? Like and when you mentioned like he was kind of putting down a rabid dog, I think that really is. I think there's just a lot going on, and we'll see if the work is put in to really lay this all out in one more comic. It probably won't be, but like, I think like, the other thing kind of going on in the background is this, and we've been seeing this over the course of the entire Zeb Wells run, which is just Tombstone's ambition and desire to win. And like, sometimes just like, the validation that comes with winning is sometimes the ultimate driver in this world. And I think it's part of, not to get too philosophical here, but like, even speaking personally, like, sometimes that desire to win makes you do things that are unkind, not nice, cruel. I don't think I've ever done anything sociopathic, but maybe some people in my life would disagree. I don't know.
I mean, this is truly sociopathic on the page.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. But he's also a bad guy in a comic book story. So like it can, to me, like it does feel justified to go to those levels, because like I guess that's the thing. I feel like what is Tombstone's ultimate motivation here? Like what's the goal? The goal is to win. Like we saw this back in the first arc. His goal was to beat the Rose, and he was going to do that any way he could. He did it by using Spider-Man. His goal then became to win the gang war, because originally it was about him being attacked, but it became more about he had an opportunity to put everything down and take over the entire territory, and he went for it. And now it's just like, he's in a position where that's going to be taken away from him, and he can't lose it, and he needs to keep winning. So, I don't know.
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm reading a book where I have to accept that in one issue, Dr. Octopus will command a fleet of space lasers to kill all life on Earth.
Right.
And then, several issues later, I'm reading about him going on a date with someone wearing Peter Parker's body, and I'm supposed to kind of recognize the humanity in the guy that just tried to wipe out everybody with space lasers.
Right.
I guess I just kind of it's hard for me to put killing your daughter in the same realm as standard bad guy stuff. It's so personal. It's not quite detached in the same way as I'm going to take over the world or something like that. You know what I mean? And also that if his goal is ultimately power, I don't see how killing his daughter is in interest of that. He's normally smarter than that. And I'm still holding out that another shoe might drop, because again, he's doing this on a full subway car trying to murder his daughter.
Right.
You know what I mean? It is public in a way that is not smart of Tombstone, someone who is normally smart about power play.
I guess. I mean, the other part of it, Dan, is I don't feel this is unprecedented in these comics. I mean, we saw this, with the Fisk family. We've seen this with the Osborns. I mean, I don't know if we've seen it as plainly as one of these characters trying to murder their family, but the desire to do irredeemably destructive things to quote unquote loved ones has been populated in comics before, in Spider-Man comics.
Totally. I just don't hold Osborn and Lonnie Lincoln in the same breath as each other.
Yeah, I guess. But
I consider one immeasurably more evil than the other. But fair enough. I think your point is well made. And I wish that I could jettison that part, but I feel like I'm on the receiving end of the past half decade of making the Lonnie Lincoln character really relatable and understandable as a villain with a, I don't know if it's heart of gold, but a moral compass. And seeing him kill his daughter, to me is oh, I didn't realize he was still capable of such an act of evil. And Spider-Man 2, I think, and again, I think this book did the work, because Spider-Man 2 comes back to saying this isn't who you are, in a sort of Return of the Jedi moment. I can see the good in you, so there is something here, and I'm excited for issue 60 to explore it, because the fight is done. If issue 60 is them brawling again, Like, to me, that will be very upsetting because I think
it's a waste. Yeah.
It needs to be issue 5 of this run where Spider-Man visits Tombstone's house and they have a sort of like moment of empathy for each other. Like, to me, that's the only way you correctly end the story. And I think would be a fitting end to Wells's run too, which I think has largely been about this sort of like how people heal after moments of trauma and find themselves again. So, yeah.
All right. What do you have any insights on what Janice did in this comic? Because it wasn't much.
Well, that's the thing. Like, she's kind of been a backseat player here. I mean, she's a damsel in distress, which is also not really how I see that character necessarily.
Yeah.
And like, we don't get a lot of moments of insight into what's going on with her other than running from her dad. You know, like
right.
I hope, like I think here there could have been an opportunity from, I don't know if she would stop and provide insight while running, but like, it is weird that like a character we spent so many pages on in both this run and the Nick Spencer run doesn't really have much to do in this story other than flee. You know, she doesn't even really fight back. Not really. And, you know, I think there could have been something done with her. I do hope she returns for issue 60 and has something meaningful to say, or do in regards to her father. So to me, that was another thing that was disappointing, not particularly about this issue, but like the story overall. I'm like, I don't quite know how Janice feels about all this.
Yeah.
But I do think Wells has been doing a great job. I mean, like, there's not a lot of like writing here, right? I mean, like, who's to say who has done what in this issue, you know? But like, he knows just the right moment to like have someone say the right thing. And for me, the like highlight of like Wells's sort of like tonal balance is when Spidey breaks Tombstone's hands and then Tombstone snaps them back into place, and Spider-Man just says, "Okay," you know, and like that got a laugh out of me in an issue that otherwise was vacant of laughs. So sure. I thought that was like really well done on Wells' behalf.
Definitely. No, I agree about that. I mean, and you know, in terms of the Janice stuff, I don't know how much I have to add about that. Like, obviously, we do have another issue. Maybe we'll get some resolution there. Like, I don't mean to sound crass here, but like in the heat of what we got in this comic, I don't know if I cared all that much about what was going through. Janice's head.
I think that's fair.
I mean?
I think that's fair.
You know, like, I mean, like, you know, from a larger storytelling standpoint, do I want? I mean, like, you know, we see her running, but where's she running to at this point? You know what I mean? Like when we see her next, where's she gonna be? I am interested to see that, but like, I didn't necessarily need that here.
Well, who knows with the detours on the subway trains these days, where she'll end up.
I wanted to see her on the train and then have like people get on and be like, "Showtime, woo!" And
man, I ended up in Jamaica. How do I always end up here? Yeah,
this is even worse than my father.
Eric Adams.
Anyway, all right. Well, you referred to it earlier when we were talking about some famous fights. This comic is unquestionably the John Romita Jr. show. Outside of just heaping praise on it, I don't. What do you want to say about JR here, Dan? I feel like you got something corked up and ready to go.
I mean, I just don't think there's anyone that can match his sequential storytelling, you know, in an action sequence or just in general. But like, I mean, as much as I love so many of the other fights, most of them drawn by him, like, I just think this is a master showcase in how you do sequential storytelling on the page, in like an action sequence. You know, it is, I think a lot of like artists would go for the sort of like pin up action moments of like, here's a beautiful page of someone jumping at someone or leaping at someone. And, you know, Romita was on our show and said like his style, he calls it deadline style. And, you know, like maybe there are more beautiful artists out there, but no one like sequences a book like this. You know, the sizing of the panels, the timing that is given to them, the focus on like geographic space and how clear he makes that. I mean, it's the little things like there's like like with both of them rolling to opposite sides of the tracks, and then that wide image of them standing on opposite sides of the subway as they choose to re-engage with each other. It's so wonderfully paced. This is like the comics medium, like being showcased, like at its best. I think is how you pace something on a page, like. I will never hold up John Romita Jr. as the most beautiful, like, line artist. But I will say, like, I think he is the best sequential storyteller that I've read in comics. Maybe it's just Amazing Spider-Man, but, like, I would be pressed to say comics in general. No one is laying it out. And to see it applied to a full, issue of a fight sequence is like dazzling, and so much of it is utilizing what comics does best, and alongside his team, like Menyz using colors to emphasize things and bringing in blurred speed, the yellows of those repeated punches on Tombstone's stomach. There's just so much going on here. I mean, even Joe Caramagna, is bringing in like all the best lettering work that he can do to like punctuate all of this. I appreciated, and we'll talk about it later in the backup, there was like a panel of the week in the kind of like bullpen bulletins in this that showed like Spider-Man and Tombstone like twirling around on the ground, and like that is an Amazing Spider-Man like staple, the sort of like shadow characters of showing movement, but like utilized here. You could pick out all of the innovations of the history of Amazing Spider-Man showing up in this book, and I was so appreciative of it. It reads quickly, but within those pages it reads quickly because the flow is just excellent.
Yeah, I agree with what you are saying there. Yeah. I would just add, John Romita Jr. is a one of one. I think we could safely say that at this point, in terms of a creator in this industry. I do this is going to sound a little weird, but I want to credit Zeb Wells for the fact that hey, look, this is Zeb Wells' final arc on after several years writing this book. This is his penultimate issue, and he has essentially ceded this comic to his artists, and has let John Romita Jr. just absolutely cook with it, which I don't want to say is surprising, but I don't know if I've ever necessarily seen that before in Amazing Spider-Man, where the writer kind of cedes this much ground to the artists for the storytelling, and yet still manages to have a very impactful, memorable story be told out of it. I mean, I've seen even some of the staunchest critics of this run be like, "Hey, this arc's pretty good." Maybe my Twitter feed is corrupted right now.
No, I'm seeing the same. I'm seeing the same thing too. And again, it gets back to that sort of like peaks and valleys of this run, which is like, I think if this run was just the JRJR and Zeb Wells issues, it would be a fairly championed run. Except he did draw the final issue 26. But right. It is so weird to see that. I mean, Zeb is has said that he, balances it, to the strengths of the artists and stuff. But I just so vastly appreciate how he works with JRJR over everybody else. It's not even, comparable. So, yeah.
And I'm not saying Zeb took this issue off, but he didn't. But he, like I said, he ceded the creative ground to JRJR in a way I don't feel we've gotten with any other creative pairing certainly over the duration of this podcast. So we're talking about 11 years worth of comics here. and that's not necessarily like a slam at like Dan Slott or Nick Spencer or anyone like that, but like you just don't see this as much anymore.
Yeah.
Like it's always a collaborative affair, or it always feels like the writer is the dominant force in comics right now. I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now. But like this was very different, and like I appreciated that, so I just wanted to make note of that.
I'd love to read the script for this issue. Because I'd be curious to know how much of it there is. Like I could see him saying, "Romita, go nuts, do the final sequence of the Matrix,"
Sure.
But with our characters, but like I could also see him because it is tight. Like the page turns are tight. It has a lot of the things that I've appreciated about the Zeb Wells run through and through. So I could also see him choreographing it, down to the moment. But whatever it is, it's a great kismet of combinations of talent.
Yeah, I feel it's too structured for it to be that free form. Like you said, like there is a tightness to how the pages flow into each other, and like each beat, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do, again, I still feel like JR just was able to cook. It's a credit to both of them. You know what I mean? Like I think like Zeb was able to probably create something that was both tight but with plenty of latitude for Romita, and Romita is such a master at his craft. He could still tell a tight, visually dominant story, and keep it flowing in a way that makes sense. Like this is called good comic book making. It's the bottom line. Like huzzah!
Tip of the hat to everyone involved, an art team and writing team, firing on all cylinders. Like bravo.
Yep.
I would say a fairly dazzling penultimate issue of a run.
Yep.
All right, Mark. Well, we're going to take a break. Why don't you tell us how our listeners can further engage with our community?
Well, Dan, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what exactly has been happening in the Slack these days, this week, whatever? What you would the time frame of your choice?
Yeah, well, there was a conversation in the Slack that was happening, a reaction to a podcast I had never heard of called West Coast D'Avengers. I don't know if a 5-year-old is hosting it, and they've added that D before D'Avengers, but I don't know. It's not a show I was familiar with, but I did check it out because on the show they were interviewing Mark Bagley, who kind of surprise dropped an announcement that he is now semi-retired and he is no longer doing interiors for Marvel, and is just doing covers. Which, like, Mark Bagley's covers are always exciting, but like I think people he's notable for his interiors and the speed at which he does them. And on the show, he said, it's just keeping up with the rat race and the kind of deadlines and scheduling of that really had been wearing him thin. I think especially if you read his Spider-Man book with Dan Slott, where he's drawing hundreds of Spider-Man characters on a page, I would imagine anybody would get burned out from doing that. But like 90s heartthrob, a tryout book winner, Mark Bagley, retiring from interiors, is a big deal. Like his interiors, what made me fall in love with Amazing Spider-Man and Ultimate Spider-Man. I mean, he's kind of like, the most prolific Spider-Man artist. Like he's got to be in the top 3.
Let's not forget, buying a commission of his is what brought us together, Dan.
Absolutely.
Met you in the flesh and lent you money in the same weekend. I mean, who could have imagined 11 years ago where do we be now?
Yeah,
if you never
exactly.
paid me back. No.
Yeah, that's it. 100%. Yeah, that's what happened. What's your reaction to this, Mark?
No, I mean, like, I am I had not heard this. As everyone knows by now, I'm not terribly active in the Slack, nor do I listen to West Coast Avengers. It does sound like, like someone who it sounds like a podcast you would come up with, Dan, if it was like a one person West Coast Avengers, but like it would be like the West Coast Dan Vengers. Like that's where I thought you were going with this. I'm like, oh wow, look at that.
Maybe the host is named Dave, and it all makes sense. And I need to look into it more. But here we go. Like after making fun of the title "The Runs" previously, like here we are making fun of another podcast title.
There you go. We're giving our critics ammunition.
Hey, look, he got Mark Bagley on the show and got a huge announcement. So more credit to him.
Yeah, more credit to him. But like with that said, like no, I'm not surprised necessarily to hear this. Mark Bagley's been doing this now since what, like 92? He started on Amazing, give or take. It's been 32 years, and he's been one of our like steadiest forces. And if he's just feeling kind of tired and burnt out, I mean, I laugh because all the time, like leading up to Ultimate Spider-Man with Bendis back in the 2000s, it was just like, oh man, I can't do Spider-Man again. And then like he's just gone on and done like another 25 years of Spider-Man. I mean, with other things thrown in, but like he still works on this book or works on this character enough where you're just like, I'm not surprised he's burnt out.
Yeah.
And I think that he is entitled to be burnt out and to take a break. I do feel that there is an element to this business of you're never fully out. Like I know he said basically like if something interests him, he'll come back. I wouldn't be shocked if the thing that interests him is maybe something where we're like, that's what brought him back. But you know what I mean? But like I guess what I'm trying to say is I think he'll be back in some shape or form doing interiors again. But like if he needs a 5, 6, 7 year break from doing this, more power to him. I mean, he's entitled. He's earned it. Viva Mark Bagley. I love him. I don't know if he was quite as influential for me as he was for you. We came in at slightly different entry points, and Ultimate didn't hit with me in real time. But like, I still recognize him as like a formative artist of my youth and then as my adulthood in terms of what he's done for comics. So, Bagley's great. I don't know what else to say.
I mean, I'm shocked this didn't happen years ago. I mean, like it is a racket, and he has been on fire. I am thrilled that he got to end it. Like, the Spider-Man book with Dan Slott was good, but like for me, like going out with one of your final works being Spider-Man life story, I think it's like a really kind of fitting way to kind of end a legacy that covered a lot of the sort of like stories that were melded together in that, which was what kind of made him an exciting artist to have on a book like that. And I think it's some of his best work are on the interiors in that book. So I think that is like really super cool. But I also think it is worth noting about Mark is that like you mentioned the industry, but like a lot of the artists that were contemporaries of his are not doing comics anymore, whether because they moved into some other medium like action figures or whatever, or promotional material or movies or what have you. Like he is stuck with comics, and comics have stuck with him. Like we get a lot of these kind of like the Venom Lethal Protector right now that really feels like a book that exists to give Michelini some work, and allow him to kind of exist beyond retirement or things like that. But like Mark Bagley remained a top artist for over 3 decades. That is almost unheard of in the comic art world. And I think hats off to him that he kept his style so modern and feeling contemporary in a way that other artists just have not been able to do, which I think speaks not only to his talent but also like the fan support of Mark Bagley. Like his style is beloved by readers, and so seeing that it may not appear in interior pages, I think, is a notable thing on both ends, his career and our reception as fans.
Yeah. All
So
right,
anyway,
Dan.
these are the kind of conversations you can have in the Slack and are going on all the time. I know a lot of my thoughts were echoed by people in there. So come join in the fun. Our Spider Slack is going strong. There's a link in the description of this episode that will let you sign up in less than a minute. Come say hi when you join, and we'd love to have you.
All right, Dan. Let's get back to our review here, and let's talk about not necessarily the story of the comic, but the contents of the comic, meaning the amount of, I guess, the amount of story we got in this comic. You've noted some very interesting things that Marvel did here with this comic book. Why don't you lay it out, and then we can kind of go from there.
Well, sure. Something that you and I don't talk very much about is like that these are books that we're reviewing, and like sometimes we'll be like, oh yeah, it's oversized, or the spine was like updated to allow for this many pages or whatever, or did yours have a weird double printing error, etc. Right? But
Right.
and we like to make fun of the editorial all the time about errors and things like that, but this is a physical thing that we're talking about. Now, some people read this stuff digitally, and more power to you. But I wanted to commend this particular issue for like what they did with the physical, copies of it. Which, if you read it digitally and you didn't get the ads, the ads in this book were all pushed towards the back of the book itself, and so it allowed the artwork to just kind of like play out uninterrupted, which I think added to the sort of like the nature of the fight scene kind of flowing into each other, which required not only a sort of like faith in your art team, but I'm sure it meant like communicating that to the people who bought the ads, a sort of like physical layout difference, and communicating it to the art team that like you have this flexibility to lay out your pages in this particular way. And that is an effort to considering the physical book that I don't think you see a lot in comics, that I think we've seen play out across this Wells run. And that might be that Wells requested it, but we saw that with the Vulture issue where we could turn it sideways, and get that different layout. And I think there's a consideration here for like what it means for a customer to buy a physical issue that I think is worth noting. It's not without its ups and downs. I'm sure you're going to, suggest, and there are other elements I want to talk about, but purely for the story, I was like, thank you, editorial. Like the little extra work that is being put in there, like, probably goes unnoticed by most, but like is appreciated and made this particular story better.
Yeah, I agree that this is a choice that I think honors the integrity of the story, and I think I don't necessarily think this is something Marvel should do all the time. I think like this is something that's good reserved for these kind of important, especially something that is so visually driven as this comic is, to not kind of break that up with ads. I mean, with that said, and for those playing the home sausage making game, Dan and I were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, but like I did feel in doing it this way, it really did expose the fact that we just do not get a lot of comic book for our money anymore, and there was nothing about this from a page count standpoint that was different than any other comic book we get. Like I don't want to like accuse Marvel of like shorting us 3 or 4 pages of story. With that said, the fact that this was so visually driven, there wasn't a lot of dialogue, so like you kind of can digest this issue at a little bit of a higher clip than if you had like I'm thinking Chris Claremont and in X-Men #1 with Jim Lee, where it's like like Magneto filibustering the X-Men at points, you know what I mean? Like, there was no moments like that in this comic, and you're kind of like breezing through, and like legitimately when I got to the end of this comic, I mean, in addition to being impressed by what I had just read, I was also just like, wait, that's it? was this a short issue? And then like I'm like, oh, that's why, because everything is at the end.
Yeah.
And I appreciate doing that for the integrity of the story. And like I don't have a solution here, Dan, is kind of the bottom line. This is what comics are in the year of our Lord 2024. Like I appreciate that they're doing things to make the reading experience better, but I don't know if there is a solution for print media that is going to make anything a sustainable model in the long term. And I don't expect to solve that with you over the course of this podcast, but it's just something to kind of keep tucked away in the back of our minds, because I'm sure that there are other people who are reading something like this and just thinking, well, that was cool, but like I don't think it was worth $5, and I don't know if they're wrong. Like it's hard to say that right now. Like it's we clocked it at what, 21 pages of
21
story?
pages of art. Yeah.
So 21 pages of art at $4.99. I mean, you're paying a quarter a story, like in my day, a quarter got you 20 minutes on Pac-Man. Yeah. Oh, right. But I'm just saying, like it just feels like, oh, okay. Like, I can read this comic in under 10 minutes. I'm not trying to be sarcastic about it, but like, that's about what it takes at this point. Is it worth a quarter a page? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, and I think like there are some additions here that I think are meant to pad that out a little bit more. Like there's this new bullpen bulletin style thing called Spiders and Symbiotes, which is mostly an ad page, but it does have some editorializing from like Nick Lowe in there that's interesting. And there was like that reveal of the pencils from John Romita Jr. And I appreciate any of that stuff. I loved all the like Stan Lee's bulletins and stuff from back in the soapbox rather from back in the day. And that kind of stuff I think went a long way to making the physical issue. I mean, it wasn't digital back then, but like it made collecting it feel special. You're a part of a club, and it's been a long time since I've complained about the lack of a letters page in Amazing Spider-Man. I think we've gone like full runs without letters pages, and now it feels like a very consistent, regular part of the book. If only because I see all of our Slack members and Patreon subscribers' names filling up those pages, like which is cool. Like I'm like, I know all these people, or it's me half the time. Right, but not that you would know, Mark, because you don't read the letters page. But
nor have I ever written a letter. So there you go.
There you go. 100% there. But like to me, like those things, like I wanted to highlight them because like it goes maybe unsaid that I think those are special things that don't get printed in the trades, right? Like they are there to reward the person that shows up, and buys the physical, I guess, or digital, like, issue by issue copy. Like, would I prefer more pages of art and writing from the creative team? Yes, I would, and I don't know why the model doesn't make the 25-page standard comic book issue still sustainable in 2024. When we get the sort of like, giant sized ones more regular than not. We're about to get one next issue, right? Issue 60 is the giant sized book. But the $5 price tag is a lot. Now, I guess you could say the pushback to the physical thing is like, you get to keep it. It's not like you go pay for a ticket for a movie. You don't get to walk out of there with a copy of the movie. This is something you have, and you can revisit, any number of times. And I will revisit this over and over because I think the fight scene is that electric, but it's worth noting. But I did still like, yes, as much as it exposes the problem with Marvel Comics in 2024, like the extra care for the product that they're delivering or able to deliver from the editorial team, I think it's notable in an issue like this.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Anything else on this, or do we want to get to grades?
Let's get to grades. Do you want to start, Mark?
You go first.
I'm giving this one a solid A.
I'm waffling. I'll go A. I was thinking A minus coming into it, and I think just having the conversation kind of upped it a little bit. Like, this really is kind of a unique, special issue here, and yeah. So we'll see how the whole run gets wrapped up, Dan. I'm excited. I've progressively I feel like I've gone higher and higher each issue. So there you go. Go figure, right? Like, it's
opposite trajectory of how we normally do on stories like this.
Yeah. Normally by the penultimate, we're like, okay, it's a C plus, and I'm a little worried about what they're gonna do next issue.
Yeah.
And this, I'm like, no, let's see what they got.
I'm legitimately excited for the next issue because I think there's really a moment here for Zeb Wells to do something really thoughtful. With the final issue, and we'll see if there's the space or whatever to do it. But if it can be anything like issue 5 of this run, I think it could be a really high note to end on. And as for the A, I gave a C plus to the previous issue. Like, if I'm talking about a book in the same breath as Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut or Coming Home, even if it's just a fight, to me, that's worth commendation of that sort of letter quality.
And that thoughtful thing they'll do next issue is a Madame Mask origin story. No.
Yeah, that's it. Or Kamala Khan just gets reinserted here to die again.
God!
And
all right.
I will eat my shoe again. My other shoe.
I know.
I'm supposed to be eating the shoe if Dan Slott comes on the podcast. So
right. There you
go. All right, Mark. Why don't you take us home?
Yeah, you bet, Dan. It's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners, and of course the viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, less than an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same week that the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. So again, this is about an hour-long show on an issue that Mark says he read in 10 minutes. If our show, commands equal or less value to you than an issue of Amazing Spider-Man, consider supporting us. You'll be spending less than half you spend buying Amazing Spider-Man comics each month to support our show, which I think is probably, dare I say, a huge part of your Amazing Spider-Man reading experience at this point. I'm talking to you, listeners, who are listening and not a part of our Patreon. Consider supporting our show. And as part of that, thank you to everybody who already supports us and the work that we do.
That is a beautiful sell job, Dan. If you value smart comics criticism and historical analysis, we hope that you'll consider supporting us on Patreon. I do hope that people think we have smart comic criticism, Dan, but I'll just say it anyway.
If you're an hour into the show and you don't enjoy our criticism, what are you doing with your life?
Complaining about us on YouTube and Twitter, probably. What we do on this show is admittedly niche, but we feel that we offer a valuable commentary and model fair methods of criticism for a character and medium that rarely receives that kind of consideration we believe it deserves. So please, if this is valuable to you, we can only continue doing what we do with your support on Patreon.
So Mark, until the Mets win it all and you express that you know Kung Fu and fight me in the subway, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk, and this is not a spoon.